let's take a look at another big concern, and that's mail. Now, malicious, a good play on, malicious and mail is the rising concerns around spear phishing. And, just as, it seems like every day we get new endpoint assets that have been compromised through business email compromise or through other different attack vectors on the endpoint. And the mail is a favorite conduit because it's easy to impersonate a target victim. Just what we're seeing is that phishes are getting a lot better. There's threat actors that are doing their homework, and that they're doing their homework on their target users, maybe by role. Maybe they are an accounts payable. Maybe they are in insurance claims management. Maybe they are just an administrative function. And so by getting some level of light context of those roles, what they're trying to do is impersonate and perpetrate individuals in the workforce so they can basically ask the target victims information or maybe get them to do things that they shouldn't be doing. So there's definitely been an evolution of campaigns that really attackers are using to basically establish good intel on how to dupe their victims. You're looking at social media, they're buying data lists on target victims, things like that. And still, it's the number one, threat for, according to the Verizon DBIR data breach incident report, which will take a look at some samples right now. So looking at that specific report, now this is a 2020 year in review. So 2020 year in review, we look at some things that are important to bring into where we are today in terms of the pandemic, where we are today in terms of remote workforce. So healthcare, in terms of actual breaches, which is basically unauthorized access of information or information resources or systems. And you have here, a total of 521. If you do a quick eyeball on the total amount of the total breaches across different industries, you see that healthcare has a good, healthy amount compared to others. I think there's really the unknown category, which is an amalgamation of different smaller, maybe sub-industries, is the only one that basically is displacing the healthcare industry. And then, of course, finance is up there, but very near to healthcare, but healthcare is still a hot area. Why? They're not as mature as the financial sector. They're not in terms of the commitment, time investment, et cetera. And so we have to make sure that we understand that healthcare is still very much a major target, and remote workforce makes it, makes healthcare organizations to be more susceptible for being targeted. And so now that we understand that, there's interconnected components, IoT devices and networks, routers, devices that are all sharing the same logical space. Cyber criminals know this, and they're going to be trying to do some level of lateral attacks, trying to get in through some medium, get some recon on the local home network in order to basically evaluate whether or not they have, a target asset that is within one of these industry sectors, namely the healthcare sector. Looking at further some things related to, actually, you know what? Let me go to this one here. The summary of different patterns that we want to look at for incidents really relates to, this is now looking at incidents. So before we looked at breaches, this is security incidents that have affected, the healthcare industry. And the bulk of the patterns that have really motivated the threat actors is really they want to profit from the information. And crimeware is the number one really conduit for really gaining information, onto healthcare systems and trying to extract personal protected health information and things like that. And so we look at crimeware and then miscellaneous errors. We'll get into that in a second. But crimeware, if we think about remote workforce, again, it goes back to that endpoint. It goes back to those network components that are adjacent and that are neighboring to those laptops. It goes back to even the vehicle like email. So we have to look at those fronts as where the battles are being waged, and we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing adequately enough in order to protect on those fronts against some of these things? Miscellaneous errors is a close second and really relates to mistakes by configuration. And this is something I really want to say that's really important. Oftentimes, like major healthcare entities, even healthcare product companies, what they do is they do what I call Noah's Ark security. They buy a two of everything and they implement it all very, very, very poorly. There's very large Fortune 50 organizations in healthcare that have the budget to buy, the Magic Quadrant type of, vendors that are out there, but the configuration is lackluster. They don't have the time, the resources, or the expertise to implement. And so there's a lot of mistakes in these types of organizations, and they don't go unnoticed by the cyber criminals, and they realize this and are banking on it.